Hey guys, we're going to talk about upgrading the extruder on the Anycubic Mega X. I didn't find many videos or information out there at all on this particular printer. I guess it's fairly new. Plenty out there on the i3 and Mega S and all that, but not the Mega X. So this only applies to the Mega X and not any of the other Mega lines. And one of the problems with the stock extruder, at least that I found, was that I was finding in the middle of print jobs, it would just stop feeding filament. And what I seem to find out is that when a print job has a lot of retractions in it, where it has to pull the filament back, it starts chewing up the filament and then it starts slipping. So you want to get one of these dual gear extruders. And I actually purchased several of them. I believe 6, because I had issues with Amazon shipping, and so I just figured, oh, I'm gonna order a bunch, and one of them will eventually get here on time. But what's the most important thing to note when you get one of these, they're all the same, by the way. The ones with the red aluminum, they're all the same. I couldn't find any difference between any of them, so make sure you get one with this, orange spring, because it's a really tough spring, really strong. And make sure you get one that has this gear right here in this armature. And I will have time indexes in the video description that you can skip parts of the video that aren't relevant for you. But I'm going to go over some of the gotchas that I got when putting this together, which I think are important. And then we're going to talk about how to calibrate the extruder and how to set it properly once you get it installed. Because you have to reverse the motor and you have to change the settings inside the G-code so that it will extrude at the right rate. It's not hard to do. It's actually quite easy, but it took some time for me to actually find out how to do it. So hopefully I'll save all of you some time, and let's get to it. Okay, so this is actually the extruder from my printer. And one of the things that actually kind of frustrated me about it was this bracket that mounts on the frame, and the way that these things are, leaves this lever right here, which makes it really hard to get to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap this around so that the lever's over here. Now that might make feeding filament a little awkward, but I think that would be still better than having to, because you have to position your arm in a really funky way to make this work. So anyway, let me get this apart, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so got it apart. So the way that this normally works goes in like this. So I think what we want to do is put it in like this. Okay, and these screw lengths that they give you are the perfect length to get through this bracket, by the way. Okay, so one of the first gotchas with this thing is getting this gear lined up. Now, the way that I did it was, if you look down, let me see this. If you look down that hole where the filament feeds, you can see where this groove is positioned. Just line the gear up so that it's straight on with that hole, and then tighten it down as tight as you can with the set screw. The second gotcha, I'm putting this thing together. Of course, you got to have this slip in here. Well, actually, I didn't do that until when you get this positioned in. This other gear should line up perfectly with this. That's the other thing, is that when you set these side by side, those two grooves should be lined up, because that's where the filament goes through. That's what grabs the filament. So you got to get the spring in here. This tensioner, I don't quite understand what the deal is with this thing. I think you have to set it before. Just kind of set it down together like this. And then, so I started the thread with it kind of lifted up off the back plate. And then I kind of lined everything up and pushed it down. Now tighten it. Okay. on this connector that comes from the printer, it's got 4 wires on it, a red and blue and a black and a green. You need to swap the blue and the red or the black and the green, but not both. I just picked blue and red, and there's a, let me get a cable and I'll show you. Okay, so you're gonna see something very similar to this that goes onto the end of this thing. When you flip it around, you see those little tabs right there? What you need to do is get a small screwdriver where there's a blue and a, this is the wrong end, this is the, yeah, this is the end that goes into the particular step motor. Anyway, so you'll have tabs, and then you'll lift them up, and you'll pull out the red and the blue, and you'll swap them. So where there's a, so this, in this case, it would end up being blue, red, green, black. And what that does is that reverses the direction of the motor, which is mandatory for this to work right. The way that we calibrate the extruder is by sending commands to the Mega X. And we're going to do that using Octoprint, and specifically the version that they've released for Raspberry Pi called OctoPi. So what we're going to do here is download the Raspberry Pi OS imager, because it has within it the option of grabbing that image and flashing it over and then just booting straight from it. If this is not the route you're going to go, or you're going to find some other means, you can skip this, of course, by looking at the time indexes that I have in the video description, and you can skip ahead. Okay, so go ahead and download the Raspberry Pi imager. I'm going to leave the link to this download in the video description, and install it on your operating system. And then once you've done that and you have it up and running, we'll look at what settings we need to do. If you're a Raspberry Pi owner, then you've probably done something similar to this before, you know, flashing the SD card and booting from it. So obviously you get your SD card, you get the device you're going to use to write to it, and what's relevant here is you go to the operating system. From the beginning screen, we've got other specific purpose OS. Then we choose OctoPi, and then choose one of these two. I use the top one. Now once you've done that, you hit Shift Control X to pull up options that you can embed in the image as it burns it. We don't need to do any of these because these are all part of the OctoPi image. So the one thing that we need to do is configure our SSID and password for your wireless network. If you're going to be plugging in with a cable, then obviously it doesn't matter. And then the other thing you should probably do is set your locale settings, and that would be it. You save that. You choose your storage device, which will be your SD card, and then you write it out. After you've got the image burned to your SD card, you obviously put the SD card in the Raspberry Pi. You need to connect the Raspberry Pi to your printer using the USB cable that came with the printer, or one like it, of course. And you need to connect the Raspberry Pi to power. It needs a good power source, usually 2 amps or better. You know, a decent iPad charger would work, or something like that. And once you've got everything connected and booted, then we will go into the settings of Octoprint so that we can send commands to the Mega X. Okay, now that the Raspberry Pi is booted up, there's one primary way that you're going to access the interface of Octoprint. And if you're in Windows and you don't have Bonjour installed, you're going to have to find out what IP address your router assigned to the Raspberry Pi, and then just type that into the browser. If you're on a Mac or any modern distribution of Linux, you can just go to your web browser and type in octopi.local, and it comes up with this wizard. Okay, so now it's giving you the thanks and all that. You go to, you have to give a username. I've already got one set up here, so I'm going to use it. Say create account. Okay. I don't like these things, so I disable them. Okay, this I leave at default. You can have it test to make sure it can access the Google DNS, because you know Octoprint likes to go to the internet and check for updates and whatnot. The host name, we want to see if it'll resolve names. We want that to be green. If not, you need to check your DNS settings in your router. Make sure you're forwarding DNS, but for most people this won't be a problem. And connectivity check, I leave it enabled. It just makes sure that it can get on the internet, which keeps things flowing smooth for the most part. So I enable that. I went ahead and enabled this. That's your option. Okay, now this is where I set up we start setting up the printer profile. So I call it Mega X, and we have a rectangular origin is lower left. We have a heated bed. These are 300 by 300 by 305, I believe. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of what we're doing. Oh, we don't want to do that next. I believe all these I just left at default. I did. Okay. So this is all just safety stuff. So I'm sure we've read a million times. Okay, so now we'll see this here. It says the serial port, just use this default. Baud rate should be 250,000. Okay, there's our profile. I want to save that. I want to auto connect. And I want to say connect. Okay, now we're connected. Now this is where the magic happens, right over here in terminal. Okay, at this point, we need to pull the feed guide out of the printhead. So you'll see this thing here. There's going to be a zip tie right there. You need to cut it off. And you just take this thing and you push it down with 2 fingers, like so. And then you pull it out. You got to use 2 hands. But you pull it out and then just leave it hanging, because we're going to take some filament, we're going to feed it through, we're going to take some measurements. Okay, we've got everything connected. We have our filament extruder, or our filament guide, disconnected from the printhead and dangling in the air. And we're here in the terminal tab in Octoprint, so we can send commands to the printer. And what I like to do is suppress the temperature messages, because they just create a bunch of noise. We need to enable the printer to be able to extrude when the printhead is not hot, because if the printhead, right now, by default, it won't extrude if the printhead isn't hot, which is a safety feature, of course, so you don't go breaking things. And so there's this website that explains, it's marlinfw.org. It explains all the different commands that you can issue. I wouldn't mess with any of this unless you really know what you're doing and you know what you want from it. But we're interested in the moment, at the moment, for this command M302, and we want to choose S0 to always allow extrusion. So we disable checking the printhead. So we go over here and we say M302 S0. Okay. It says okay. We can verify that by just typing in M302, and it tells us extruders, we're enabled. Now what we want to do is make sure that you should push some filament through the guide so that some of it sticks out. Then get some wire cutters and cut the filament flush with the filament guide. Don't cut the guide, the tubing, just cut the filament. And then once you've got it cut flush, you come over here to control, and you want to extrude about 10 millimeters of filament. Click on that, and it'll kick out a certain amount of filament. Okay. Now what you want to do is measure. You want to cut it again flush at the guide tube at the end of it, and then you want to measure how much filament actually came out. Use some calipers or something. You want that measurement in millimeters. Now once you have that measurement, we're going to come back here, we're going to go to terminal, and we need to, I like to clear the screen here, we need to type in M503 or 503, which gives us the settings for the printer. And if you scroll up, you'll see here, these are your 4 stepper motors, your X-axis, your Y-axis, your Z-axis, and your extruder. Now by default mine was set to 400, and when I told it to push 10 millimeters of filament, it actually pushed 27.5, which is way more than it should. It should push 10 when I asked for 10. So there's a calculation you have to run, which is very simple. We just type in, well, we take the requested filament amount that we put in, which was 10 millimeters. Then down here we type in how much we actually got that we measured, which in my case was 27.5. Then you put in here what the setting is that we just got from the M503 command, which in my case is 400. And you just divide these two and multiply it by this, and you get what your new setting should be. Then we go back to Octoprint. We need to type in this command, M92. And then we want to set the extruder, and we want to set it to 145.45. In my case, yours will be different, of course. Okay, then we check to see if that took. And we see here that it is. Then you want to go back into control and you want to repeat this. You want to extrude another 10 millimeters, take your measurement, and if it, in my case when I did this, it came out to like 11.5 this time. So you would go back into this, into your calculation, you would put in here the value that you now have it set to, and then we would put in the new amount that we got out. In my case it was 11.5, and then it's going to give you a new reading. You can do this a couple of times to really dial in your accuracy, and in my case when I was done I measured out 10.75 millimeters, and I figured with the burrs at the end of the cuts on each end that was pretty close to accurate, so I left it at that. Now that we have the setting that we want, we go back into Octoprint. Again, we're going to use the M92 command and put in our setting. Well, that's just, you get your setting the way you want. Then you have to set Octoprint back to, you need to set this cold extruder setting back to this setting here. The reason we're doing this is because, for example, when you go to the tools menu on the printer and you tell it you want to feed like some new filament, if this isn't set this way, it's going to start feeding the filament whether the print head is hot or not, and that will cause jamming, and it could cause issues with your extruder motor or whatever. So we need this to be set this way so that doesn't happen. So we go back into here, we set that setting, check it. Okay. Now that we've got our settings the way we want, we can write those out to the printer so that they stay that way when you reboot the printer. Because in this, right now as it is, if you turn the printer off and on, all those settings will get undone. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. We type M500, and then that saves it to the EEPROM. And that's it. I hope that helps you out and saves you some time. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments, and do the like thing and all that. And thank you very much.